Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today, for week 3 of our sequel summer season, we are talking about A Quiet Place Day 1, the 2024 film, screenplay by Michael Sarnowski, directed by Michael Sarnowski. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Pizza, pizza.
And Alex Calleros. Shh. Nice. All right. So, yes, like I said, we're in week 3 of our sequel summer season. Last week, we talked about Furiosa, which is actually a prequel. And we're back this week talking about A Quiet Place Day 1 that is also a prequel. And I want to talk about prequels probably today for this conversation. Next week, we will be talking about Twister, which I am very excited about.
Yay!
I saw the extended trailer for Twisters they played before this movie, and we're going to talk about it. It's going to be a movie that we watch and we talk about after we talk about Twister.
I also saw before this movie the extended trailer for Alien Romulus, and I'm more looking forward to that movie than I was before now.
Oh, okay. All right. That's a twist. Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's talk about A Quiet Place Day 1. For those of you watching on YouTube or the Spotify app, Trisha's in costume and nailing it. I immediately recognized it.
Thank
Very
you.
well done. I also saw this movie 120 minutes ago, so it is fresh in my mind. We have some hot takes from Michael happening.
Whew.
So A Quiet Place kind of came out of nowhere. It was an original IP. It had something novel going for it. It's a super quiet movie. The Mix was one of the few movies that ever lets it go to digital silence. We did a Lessons from the Screenplay video where we talked to the sound designers of A Quiet Place. And that was really fun to hear about their sort of process. And it featured just a lot of really cool sound design stuff that supported the story, supported the world. There was a lot of mystery to it. Quiet Place 2 sequel does some flashbacky stuff, so starts to fill in the world. We kind of see Day 1 from the John Krasinski family perspective. And then we also are continuing the story forward. And that was pretty fun and cool. They did some cool things. So it's interesting. So we have Quiet Place Day 1. It's a prequel talking about Day 1, which we already sort of saw, but from a different perspective, unconnected to any of the characters, right? There's no returning characters that I could detect.
Jaimin Hansu's character from part 2. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
he's running
I don't
that
remember
kind of colony
at all. Oh, okay.
It's like
That makes a lot more sense.
The origins of the colony, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I was like, they cast him in this, and then he didn't do very much in this. That's a weird choice.
There you go.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, so that makes sense. So there was some connection. So that's cool. But it's interesting the perspective that they chose to tell the story from. So Lupita Nyong'o's character, Samira,
Sam.
I don't remember them saying it.
Sam, yeah.
Right? Okay, they call her Sam. It's an interesting choice, and I want to get into theme where she's this character who has a terminal illness, and we know that from first scene, basically, but is in this survival situation, and there's kind of some things that it feels like it's reaching for in terms of what does it mean to live versus survive, and how do you go, and going on your terms, and all these things that didn't quite ever hit the nail on the head for me. It was sort of the hammer's hitting in a general area, and I can see the area that you're aiming for, but it's not hitting for me. So it was interesting that was the perspective, that was the character arc, and there were some cool moments, but overall it didn't feel like it was bringing a whole lot new to the franchise or to the experience. So these are my hot take thoughts, which was this was fine, but I don't know what it was about or what it was trying to add to the overall experience. So that's me. Alex, you made a face. Tell me about A Quiet Place Day 1.
I really liked it. And I think
Interesting.
when a movie announces out of the gate that's about a character in hospice, I sit forward. I'm like, this is a summer blockbuster about a character who is dying in the way that most of us will die, not in a movie way. I think movie death doesn't feel like actual death most of the time. It's just kind of like a video game or something. But somebody, dying of a terminal illness is how most of us will go, how most of our family members will go. And so there's something immediately real about that and just kind of intense about that in a more relatable way. And I thought that was a really interesting choice to frame this movie as we're not watching a character who's trying to survive for the future. So what does that mean? You're right off the gate. We're doing something different here. And I also think it does allow for a thematic kind of almost like marinating in what comes after loss. Like there's no hope. There's no future. There's no like tomorrow eventually. Like the number of tomorrows is limited now. What does one do with that? And I did think the movie really functioned as I think I read some reviews or some reactions that kind of were talking like you were talking, Michael, like what did this add to the franchise? This didn't really build out the world very much. Like there's that one part where are they like eating alien eggs that they grew or something? Like, is that
right.
World building? I don't know. None of that mattered to me really, because it actually seemed like a very different movie in some ways than the first two, kind of a separate, I guess if we're building out the cinematic universe of A Quiet Place, this felt more like an auteur movie by the director of Pig, with Nicolas Cage, a movie I didn't really care for, but I could feel that this director was interested not in building out this universe, but in using this universe to explore this theme, this idea of, what does one do when the world ends, when your world ends, what is left, what is worth doing at all anymore. And, so the movie, I didn't feel the movie was perfect, or there was lots of uneven things, lots of magical cat, survival, lots of, Joseph Quinn's character was interesting and something's going on there, but I didn't get enough to understand what's going on there. So there's a lot of things about the movie that didn't work great for me, but what did work great for me is Lupita Nyong'o and her performance, like as the thread through this movie. And just when I'm with her and where we end with her, that's what was like, wow, I did not sign up for this and I'm happy I got this. And it was just a really pleasant surprise. It wasn't just another, here's me with my family and we've got the kids and we've got, I was expecting another family formation eventually. That's about like keeping the kids alive for the future. And this is like dealing in a different way with, there is no future. What does that mean? And what do we do with that? And I think that's kind of a tapping into an existential dread feeling we all might be having, in recent years. and I think it's a really profound thing to explore in like a mega international summer blockbuster.
Cool. Trisha, what about you?
Yeah, I'm with you, Alex. I really liked this. The scary parts of it were not very. And I kind of knew that like from the first scene, because the tone of the first scene where they're sitting in the therapy group and he's like, well, why don't you share a poem? And she shares her poem, which is very sarcastic and very funny. And I just kind of got the sense that the study of how thoughtfully and poetically things were being presented to me just made me feel like instantly like seen and cared for by the movie. And I was not at all worried that it was going to like go to like a graphic or a gory place for like its own sake. It signaled to me that this movie was about something thematically, and that whatever that was buried within this central character who is instantly magnetic and wonderful to me. Being Lupita Nyong'o is just perfect in my mind all the time. And it's interesting that I don't think the marketing made it clear that she was dying. I think you kind of had to see the movie. I mean, you see how she looks in the trailers and you're like, she seems not well, potentially. Like there is something there, but the fact that they kind of were able to conceal that from audiences, because it is sort of the crux of the whole movie, both in terms of plot and theme, right? And I was very impressed by that, just as an approach. I instantly was like, oh, I love this. Oh, this is what I want from this kind of movie. It reminded me a lot of like in the 90s, I feel like there were a lot of PG-13 supernatural thriller, but essentially dramas. Like, I feel like they were making this kind of movie more in the 90s. And it really felt in some ways like a throwback to that. Partially also because it's kind of sentimental. And there are some conveniences and logical bumps and lots of that other stuff. But in the 90s, we didn't care. And like, I'm going to nitpick them probably here on this podcast, because I do think that they affect people's experience watching this in 2024. But overall, it was just sort of fine-tuned to my taste of things that I like about this type of genre. And so, yeah, I just really enjoyed it, start to finish. I felt like I was really compelled by the character, by the journey. I just want to walk uptown and get pizza, like, because that's what I came here to do, right? Like, I love that as a construction for essentially like an alien movie, like survivalist movie. And for the record, I think that there are critics who don't like that about this movie. Like, I love the approach. I love the premise. I love the central character. I love its treatment of the theme. I love it as an entry into essentially what could have been a money grab of a movie franchise, of a franchise movie. And this doesn't feel like that. There's some obligatory action, thriller, tense sequences, and some detours, like you mentioned, Alex, which I want to get back to, all of that stuff. But overall, I was like, if someone had given me a Quiet Place prequel, this is what I hope I would have made, because this is a kind of movie that interests me. And there were about 80 million ways they could have made a movie that didn't interest me as much as this does. And so I am here for it.
Nice. Cool. All right. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, same as Alex and Trisha. To talk about the bigger scope of what is this franchise now, like the Variety review, I think, of this movie was like, oh, they didn't really do anything to set up the world. Like, it's like day one, and they didn't really. And I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't either. Like, I don't need to know that like the engineers had sex with a giant ear, and that's like where the aliens came from. Like, and it was fine. It is interesting to have Jaimon Hansu reprise his role and then do very little in the movie. So it's like, but then that makes me want to be like, oh, are they going to do like a colony movie, right? Like a sort of spiritual sequel to this movie that's then following him and Eddie Munson as they get to the colony. That's just what Joseph Quinn is going to be called to me forever. And I think he's okay with that.
Yeah, he earned it.
So like, I'm totally down for that, but I'm also fine if they're just like, no, let's just put this character in, and he's there and he gets a couple scenes. Like, that's fine too. But yeah, ultimately, as you were just saying, Trisha, like, I care so much more about just this sort of quiet, literally character piece that this movie is trying to be. I think when we talked about the second movie, which I like, we talked about it feeling just a little more actiony or a little more Hollywoody or something, where it was like, the tension and the character focus of the first movie is maybe still here, but not quite here quite as much. And then the trailers for day one was just like, look, there's like dozens of aliens crawling all over the buildings. And I was like, oh, okay. They were just doing an alien invasion movie. Great, good stuff. And yeah, I've talked about like when you watch the Rockies or the Jawses in order, they just like the thing that the movie is not really about, but which is the surface level thing, gets more and more in the movie. And then the actual character stuff and the theme stuff gets less and less. There's a great article about how the Jurassic World sequels are bad because they just throw more dinosaurs at the screen and forget to actually be about anything. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was someone cool. Quiet Trisha, I'm talking. It was Trisha, sorry. Go read that article. It's great. So yeah, I just really appreciated that while this movie could have done all those things, as we were saying, it was just like, no, we're going to be a really quiet character piece. it doesn't even need to be set in the Quiet Place universe, which maybe is a point against it for this being an installment in this franchise, but I don't really care about that. I'm just like, you can, like, you're going to have, it's day one, you're going to have the obligatory, here's how people go from living their normal lives to alien apocalypse. You're going to have your sequences that you can only have because it's a movie about monsters who hear good. And like, that's great because that should be there. But then beyond that, then we're just going to focus on a very small cast of a couple characters and what they're dealing with and what they're going through, and theme and character things and arcs and cool ending like the first movie. And I'm walking out of the theater going, hell yeah. So that's where I'm going.
Yeah. So that is something that I appreciate about this movie is, as you're saying, there's a lot of bad sequels or prequels that could be made to this franchise that loses the spirit or is just an easy cash grab and just kind of recycles things. And one of the things I also hate, we've talked about this on the show, we've talked about Solo, like over explaining the world when it doesn't need to be explained can be really annoying. And that is one of the things that I do appreciate about this movie, is that it doesn't try to explain anything more than any of the other ones, besides the kind of weird egg eating sequence that you talked about, Alex, that honestly feels like it could have been like a producer note and they shoved it in at the end. Right. It does absolutely nothing. But that was one of my fears going into this movie, seeing the trailer, seeing the like, oh, it's an alien invasion, they're going to explain everything, and here's why they're here, and here's what they're trying to get from us. And I really appreciated that they didn't do that. I have some like knock-on bumps that come from that, but I think credit where credit is due, it's a bold choice to not try to over-explain this world.
Mm.
I feel like it comes from a good understanding of what works about this franchise, and it's never been about the aliens or about the sci-fi lore. It's always been about very human dramas in the backdrop of this terrifying situation that the humans are in. And I like that this installment is kind of setting a precedent of, if we continue making movies in this franchise, the thing you do is find other humans with their own unique, interesting stories that are powerful when set against this backdrop, as opposed to, we're building out the cinematic universe of Quiet Place, and we're eventually going to go to space and, get back at the aliens. It's not that kind of franchise, and it never has been. And I'm so happy that whoever is shepherding it is not trying to make it into that, and is letting it be, let it be the thing that is why it works. And as you said, Brian, it's the Jaws thing where, the first Jaws is about these characters. Eventually it's about just sharks and more sharks. And it's nice that this franchise is so far just staying in the place that the original was.
Yes. I think, though, when it comes to, I guess, world building or exposition, for lack of a better word, though, it is a fine line to walk, because I also despise over-explaining. But there are some interesting moments of like world building or like rule exploring, boundary setting that this doesn't bother to do, that also could be a really interesting engine for drama in this film. So like, it's day one. People find out really fast that they need to be quiet.
It's very surprising.
That was very strange. Like really quickly.
Way too fast they find that out. They find that out in like 10 minutes, and suddenly everyone knows that they need to be quiet. Like, but also that they can't be seen, right? Like maybe you would quickly learn that you need to be quiet, but you would also assume you could probably be seen, right? Or like perceived in another sense by these alien beings. So you would also probably try to stay out of sight and like not shine flashlights in their eyes, or like walk on the street in open daylight. You might try to not do those things because it would take you a while to understand what their limitations are, right? And so it is interesting. That would be a vehicle for drama. I would imagine that, we would assume that alien creatures are more like us. And so if we found out that they had super sensitive hearing, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do other things. So like, it would be interesting if at first everyone's like, well, we should only move at night. Like we should only move silently at night. And then they realize, wait, we as humans are completely dependent on our sight, and they have no sight. So actually, it's way safer to move during the day when we can see any potential obstacles in our way. This kind of thing, it feels like should be a part of the text of this movie, because it could provide interesting opportunities. When those two kids are in the fountain and they're using the water to mask their sound, I want to see how those two kids got in the fountain. Like, I want to see them realizing, or like just running in there for safety or just to hide, and then realizing that they could talk to each other because that the water was masking their sound. They just, all of this stuff could have been a part of the like work our way through itness of this movie, giving the characters something to do and work on. Like, these characters need projects.
Right.
And actually they have surprisingly few projects.
Right.
On the topic of the going to catch the cat and it's climbed up on a beam in the alien nest.
I think what I read
is the word I'm going to use for this.
The intent is that they're growing their own food.
That's what I'm seeing too, is that they seem to be growing their own food, which also begs a question about like, why are they murdering everybody if they just came here to farm?
Using the bodies as compost. Yeah.
Well, but I was thinking about this more on rewatch, and I was like, you know who doesn't have a project is Eric, right? The Joseph Quinn character, other than like escorting Sam to the pizza parlor. And like, what if, you know, he's here to be in law school, right? And so there's some pressure from his family, but he feels like he's not doing anything useful in his life, especially now. Give him a project. He's on the ground. He's observing something about the aliens that nobody else knows. What if on the radio they're hearing, you know, on the headphones, they're hearing misinformation? And he's like, wait, that's wrong. I know that isn't right. I can help people be safer because I've learned something about them. Like, give him something to do where that information that he gains by chasing that cat into that place then means something, right? Like, maybe he's going to stay behind with Sam because he's like, my life is also meaningless. I've wasted my whole life doing this thing my parents wanted me to do. And she's like, you definitely have not. You are useful. You have done all of this stuff for me. You also have this knowledge that you can bring to people who are surviving this catastrophe. And I don't know, I just was like missing some of that, like, what are the boundaries? What are the rules? Not because I care about them in and of themselves, but because they provide an engine for other kinds of drama in the movie.
Yeah, I think there's interesting sort of what can you do in this world, and then what wasn't done. And, you know, obviously it's easy for it to be like, but you could have done this, you could have done this. But the other thing I was thinking about is characters design stuff, which I really like the design of both these characters. But I was thinking about the first movie where you have a deaf girl as one of the main characters, right? And then you also have a family who isn't communicating in an apocalypse where you're not allowed to speak. You know, it's like these things that feel like thematically like boom, just right there. And this movie, there's like a little bit of that, but it's like, you know, when she was kind of like touching the piano when they got to the jazz club, I was like, oh, maybe I kind of felt like she was going to go out playing music, you know, but I was like, maybe she's going to like play the piano and all we hear is like the nice piano tune and there's no sound effects, but then we just see the outside and we see them all rushing in or something, right? That kind of thing. But also like the movie didn't do a lot of like, she loves music. She just wishes she could listen to music. She, you know, like the one time, like it's like it does with her dad. And we get into that a little bit, but it's like, you could have really made it feel like this was like a huge payoff, right? She's a poet. What if her poet only works? What if she was a slam poet? And she's like, it doesn't really work when it's written. It only works when it's spoken. And like, then that's something she can't, whatever, you know, like these are just like very, you know, off the top of my head ideas. But it's like, that's something the first movie did really well, was say like, who belongs in specifically this apocalypse, not just in any apocalypse or any alien invasion, right? So within all that, I still like everything. And in terms of the origin stuff, it's like, I agree that would be interesting because this is the day one movie. So it's like, if you're ever going to do an extended going from it not happening to
I was thinking of that whiteboard in John Krasinski's like basement where he's like got all of his notes about them written really clearly, right?
What
and
is
like,
the weakness?
What is the weakness circled like 18 times? It's like I don't want this movie to be that list, but I feel like some of those things should be in this movie, right? Like some of the facts that we've learned, I want to see people learning them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think maybe on a meta level, it's like, we already had a first movie that just dives right into the world and it explains the world to you with characters who already know how to do it. Then in the second movie, we start with them going through this whole thing starting and everything. So then it's like, now are we going to do a third movie where it's like, now the things you've already seen, we're going to do over the course of 45 minutes of like them learning all this stuff that on a meta level, we as the audience have already known for 2 movies. So I wonder if that was part of the conversation, was just sort of like, people know what the Quiet Place world is. So like, let's just get to it. Right. So it's like in a vacuum, I agree. But then on a meta level, I'm like, I don't know if I wanted to necessarily see like a bunch of strangers who are all going to die, like spend a whole act of this movie, like figuring out how the world works, because again, I was just here for the character story. Speaking of which, we should get into Eric more because I feel like I agree, for being one of the only 2 characters in this movie, essentially. I don't really know a lot about him. I don't really know. I really like him in general as a character, and sort of this just helpless, like Lupita Nyong'o has to take care of this stray who follows her along, and also a cat. And like I like that as a character choice, and I like just watching him and everything. But at the same time, it's like I wish I had known more about who he was, what he wanted, what the ending sort of means for him.
Yeah. So I feel like you guys have just touched on kind of all the things that were basically just really in the way of me getting into this movie. Like I said, I like the choice to not explain too much. But I was really struggling with like, is there a genre mismatch here or a budget mismatch here? Like, it's going for this grounded story. We're following this character. She's terminally ill. It's like, okay, these are like real raw things we're going for, but it's set against these like huge visuals of New York being destroyed. But like, and I'm kind of hyper focused on VFX these days. So I was just really distracted by these are fine visual effects, but like they're not really doing it. So like, I either want you to have a bigger budget and like blow me away with these spectacles, or kind of, like the original film was very small, contained. You didn't see the aliens that much. It was low budget feeling, but it felt real and it was focused on that realism, that grounded realism. This movie felt like it was kind of trying to have it both ways, where it's like, this is a grounded, real story. It's going to be handheld, but also here's a bunch of CGI and like okay compositing happening constantly. So like that aspect of it was distracting to me. But even more so, I think all these character things that you guys are talking about. So if I'm being honest, like I love Lupita, Sam, I was not really invested in as a character. And I think it's partially the sort of the lack of the project, like you were saying, Trisha, where she has this goal, right? She wants to get pizza one more time when she's in New York. And that's cool. But I feel like I was trying to kind of reach for the theme and what her character arc is, because she sort of seems sort of resigned to death at the beginning, but is also like says this place is awful in her poem. So we get very clearly that she doesn't like this. When she hears they're going to the city, she does want pizza. So it's also not like she doesn't want to live. Like there's already something, like this isn't going to be a story about her like realizing that life is worth living. Like it doesn't feel like she's lost that aspect of her either. And so there was sort of this vague sense for me of like, I don't know exactly what you want or what you need. And I've already been told that you're going to die. So I'm kind of just watching you slowly get to the end, where I was sort of able to predict there's kind of going to be one or two endings, and it's probably going to be like you sacrifice yourself for the other people because you're already like, but that didn't feel like it was even set up or earned as part of the arc, which I think taps into kind of what you were calling out, Brian, of like in the original Quiet Place, Millicent Simmons' character, Regan, like has a literal superpower. Like her arc is also the superpower. It's like it answers the question of the world. Like all of that is just so neatly like drawn together. And I was waiting for Sam's superpower and I never found it. And so I just had this kind of weird relationship where like I didn't dislike her, but there wasn't like, I didn't feel like motivated by her arc or pulled into it either. And so I just think it's interesting and kind of like you were bringing up there, Brian, like Eric, I think is kind of a vaguely drawn character where, as you were saying, Trisha, I don't know what his project is. I don't know quite what he wants, but like they have chemistry and they're like fun to see together. So I want him to live. And so I have like, I care about them caring about each other, which is cool. But he's just kind of also there. And I don't understand what him being a lawyer has to do with anything that's going on. So it felt to me like interesting pieces in isolation that didn't seem like they all necessarily belonged together in this movie.
Yeah, to me, part of what's interesting, I think I'm thinking about the context of this director and his previous film. And
which I know nothing about.
I would not have chosen him to make a blockbuster of any sort. And so I think it's a really interesting case study in someone who's interested in just kind of maybe a meditative character study on grief or acceptance or kind of there's something I read it somewhere. My friend told me about it. The idea of different kind of developmental stages relating to like tragedy. So it's like there's a pre-tragic mindset where it's like you've kind of never experienced tragedy, and so you kind of don't even know what that feels like. There's like being in a tragedy where it's just like you're just in despair, and there's post-tragic, which is like you've come out the other side of it. And this movie seemed like it felt to me like he wanted to make a meditative movie about the post-tragic experience of I'm going to die and then or the world is over, everything's over. But then there's still beauty on the other side of that. And so I liked that movie that was in here. But I do think it is an odd match to try to make that meditative kind of goalless movie and package it in a summer blockbuster in a franchise that has had what you've been talking about, where there's these clearer character goals and superpowers and objectives. This movie is really about like one last day in New York, one last day having my favorite pizza before I die. That's really the story here. But there's these necessities of a sequel, prequel, blockbuster. We got to have the big action scenes. We have to have, whatever that sequence is where he has to go save the cat on the beam.
They literally did it, guys. They literally did it.
Yeah.
So like they don't, like these are not scenes that you would put in that movie about my meditative last day on earth, but they're also required for this movie. So I think that's where a lot of the weird feeling is like, there's a movie here that I love because I love meditative movies about death. And I also like A Quiet Place, and that's a fun movie too, but they're trying to be mashed together. And I don't know that they actually can go together perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I have a couple thoughts here. The first one is that I think that something helped me with the theme here. I just want to like sort of flag a couple of scenes thematically that I think are really interesting. The first one being, of course, the scene in the Marionette Theater where she's watching the performance of the marionette performer, and she gets there and she's like, "You tricked me. I hate this. This is not a show I want to see." She's pretty anti that entire show. The guy comes out with the suitcase. He's old. It's just a suitcase. He shuffles on stage and she's like, "Oh God, kill me. Like, I hate this." And then he takes out a little boy marionette and like inflates a balloon and flies this little boy around, right? And the wonder on the kids' faces and like the music in the soundtrack and in the diegetic music in the theater are all signaling like wonder, innocence, this childlike magic that can be in the world. And then when the balloon pops, which is part of the show, but she it kind of like snaps her out of that. And she's kind of like, okay, forget this. And she just like walks into the lobby, right? And then eventually leaves. And that's how she ends up the first person on the bus and all of this. So then there's that scene that is thematically echoed, obviously later, in the scene where they're in the bar and he does a magic trick for her. It's literally he does another magic trick for her. And you can see on her face, right, as he's working, she's like, okay, I'll do this silly little magic trick. All right. And then he genuinely surprises her with the way that he pulls off the magic trick. And again, there's this like wonder to it. It's messy, but it kind of signals to me about like what living means for her, right? Like, or what she was before this, kind of what you're getting at about the pre-tragic mindset, right? She's very much a post-tragic person. And then she's saddled with a person who is like in the middle of it, right? Where he's just like in basically panic mode all the time. Right. And he's so childlike too in the way that he follows her. He's like, I just want to get pizza with you. And she's like, this is not helpful for me. But it is sort of this interesting study on like, again, I don't think it's clear in the text, but I do think it has kept me thinking about the movie, about like where her journey is and why I did feel affected at the end of it. Like that magic trick scene, I was like, oh, this is where this resolves, where, you know, she's almost angry at the Marionette Theater of like, how dare you make me feel this thing again that I had like left behind. And because it's painful, right? That sort of like hope and wonder. And then arriving back at that place and being happy that she's having that emotion again another time. And like also, you know, they're eating pizza, they're like pretending to listen to music. And I do like those scenes because they signal to me that although like as of the time of this recording, I haven't been able to put the theme in a sentence, they signal to me that there's depth here, at least enough or more than I expected from this movie. And I like it for that reason. And I was kind of promised that from like the first act of the movie. And so when those things came back in the end, I felt gratified to see them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think there's a lot of sort of apocalypse as a genre, post-apocalyptic as a genre. There's always or often a theme surrounding why bother to survive. Then you add to that someone who's dying, someone who has even less reason to survive this situation, you know? And so it's like, just walk outside and scream. Just why not, you know? Like, so then obviously, like, as you were saying, Trisha, like to give her that goal, you know, to just, she's like, I'm going to do things my way. And if I die on the way doing it, then oh well. Right. And I like also it she didn't even get the pizza. She didn't even get the Patsy's pizza. You know, like to me, that was a really nice way of the movie feeling like it wasn't like insulting the audience's intelligence by being like, you did the thing. It's like, if you think that if you're walking out of the theater being like, man, she never got the pizza that she wanted, like what a bad ending for her. It's like you weren't paying any attention, obviously. And hopefully a few people think that. But the fact that it's like, she sets up that's what she wants, and I'm like, I'm really hoping this movie's going to do more than just I wanted to get pizza, so I'm going to get pizza. Like, I'm going to give the movie the benefit of the doubt. It's going to go from there. And then of course we slowly get, as you do in movies, her backstory and why she wants it and everything. But then when she gets to Harlem, it's like the pizza is clearly not why she's there. And you know, she is putting together these memories in her life and this time in her life that made her happy. And then like he brings her the little fake pizza with the pizza from the other place and writes Patsy on it and everything. But it's just like, I really like that it gave us the MacGuffin and then told us that didn't really matter, because that was clearly like, she knows that she didn't care about the actual MacGuffin. She knew why she was there. And then he knows why she's there. We know why she's there. And then she gets to go out on her own terms, basically. And that just all really worked for me.
It's like the get what you need, not what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that it's embodied where the real meaningful moment for her is when she's looking at the photo of her and her dad and the experience of being there in that jazz club. And that's her catharsis, it felt like in the movie. But all this brings me back to, okay, we get that for her, but as you're bringing up, Michael, this character of Eric,
Mhm.
what is his deal? Where is he starting? Where is he going? And I think I was reading on Reddit, people were saying the director or somebody mentioned that there were some scenes cut that established that he was like maybe suicidal. So he was also in this kind of like grappling with like what's worth going on death thing. That seems pretty important.
That changes everything.
They did an
like
Aliens. They just cut it. They cut the whole thing. If you're going to pair the terminally ill person with the suicidal person, that's a really powerful thematic pairing to then like both maybe be the two people that would walk the other direction toward the pizza. So that seems really strange to me that was not established. If that's correct, that was not established in the movie.
Right.
And it was a real problem for me because early on when he's following her, like all you can do is read into the performance, and he just seems like, like you're saying, Trisha, a little kid, a stray who's very scared. But you would probably walk the other direction with the other people if you were that kid. But there's also the magic of the cat. Like he sees the cat after emerging from the water. That also seemed like it needed more setup. Like I needed some moments before, like what happened to him before he popped out of the water that made seeing a cat so magical and so meaningful that he will not follow the cat owner to the pizza place. Anyway, so I will admit, while I loved Lupita's story and I felt it by the end, not so sure about Eric's story and what's going on there.
Just really quickly, going back to Lupita's story before we kind of move on.
Yeah.
I do think it's really interesting that in her final little voiceover monologue, which is really just her reading the letter, right? That she wrote to Eric. But, she says something like, "Thank you for bringing me home. I had forgotten how the city sings, and you can hear it when you're quiet." I do wonder if there's like something there that's like a missed opportunity of her. The movie's kind of about like, again, a return to a state of like childlike joy and innocence. There's so much about her relationship with her father and the sweater, right? That like the sweater makes it out of the movie and it belonged to her father because we see him wearing it in the picture at the jazz club. You do wonder if that there is more that can be connected there, where it's like she returning her to the neighborhood is sort of metaphorically returning her to this like pre-trauma stage. And I just wish that like the love of the city were kind of more in there. I love the scene where she walks into up to the bookstore, right, and like picks up that sci-fi novel and like smells the pages and just kind of hugs it to her chest like an old friend. I love that. And I wish that there were more of like, again, feeling, she insists like, we're going into the city, we're getting pizza in the city. And then we later come to find out that means something far more specific. We're not getting pizza anywhere in the city. We're getting pizza at the place that I want to get pizza in the city. But just this sense of like, where I came from is encompassing a whole idea of who I used to be and projecting that onto New York as a place. It's right there already in the text when you see that incredible shot of they're coming into the city and the graveyard, the cemetery is right there and the New York City skyline is right behind it. It's like it's all juxtaposed right there. Her past and her future are right in front of her on these two different planes. And I just wish that it were like connected up a little bit more in the text before you get to that final monologue.
Yeah, so I was thinking about soul a lot in this movie because there's just a lot of crossover of, dad and jazz and music and New York and black protagonists. That's
and pizza.
Cool work. And pizza.
And death.
Yeah. And death, right. Like, and especially the sort of like that movie is very clearly about like life and death and living and like, the difference between living and succeeding and being alive, all those things. And so it was weird also, I think maybe that was subconsciously, I kept kind of doing a comparison of like, there's so many of the similar elements and I'm just not feeling them in this movie. And part of me thinks that like, I don't think everything needs to be explained in a flashback. But like thinking about Soul does like a lot of flashback. You see his previous life, you understand viscerally like the things that the protagonist cares about and loves about music, and it's using audio and visuals to create a sensory experience that like really like creates that for you throughout the journey. And it's interesting that like this is another movie where sound is a big part of it, and I'm wondering if that could have been used like weaponized against us even more, like thinking about flashbacks of her with her dad or being in the club and just like the liveliness of like feeling that and hearing that smash cut to it's silent and dead. Like I feel like you could really use those cinematic tools to get us in her headspace a little bit more. And but also again, I feel like this is where the arc bumps up against the IP, where it's like even in those moments where, you know, there's a brief flashback where she's like dreaming, she opens her eyes and we see bright, happy New York outside the window. And then there's like a jump scare because there's a, you know, alien there and it cuts to the dark. That was one of the few jump scares that actually got me, because I think I was sucked into like, oh, I want to be inside this image. I want to see what she's seeing. And like, I stopped thinking about, you know, the quiet placeness of it all. And so we have like a little glimpse of like, this is the New York that she knows. And then smash cut to, now you're in a movie where you can't talk to anyone about anything.
Right.
And like, I don't know what that does for her arc, let alone and now you're in a subway and you gotta swim.
Subway
what
sequence
that does.
was just like, where are they going? Why are they going?
Yeah.
Why would this be a place that you would go?
That cat is wild and insane and like a
It's
magic
a service
being.
cat, Michael.
It's a magic service cat.
Yes.
Named Frodo.
Frodo.
Anyway, so it's just interesting. Like, I really like a lot of the things that this movie's reaching for, and it absolutely did not have to, as we're saying. But also, I feel like it's having to shove them into this IP makes it messy and kind of undercuts maybe even some of the things it was reaching for me.
Also, you're making me think of the new season of The Bear, where there's just a lot of just crazy flashes to like things from his past and everything, and it's like we in the text we're not going to tell you what's going on, but we are just going to edit the hell out of like what's going on through his mind at all times. So it's like, yeah, you certainly could have taken that approach where it's like you said, just like loud, crazy, fun, cut to quiet, and like just keep going back. You know, that's not what this movie is, obviously, but there is. Yeah. I was thinking about like what the first movie did with sound and how I don't know that either the sequels or either of the follow-ups did sort of like push those boundaries of like what else can we do with the medium of sound. Yeah.
It is interesting. The one thing that this movie has baked into its premise is survival with a lot of other people. Because the first two Quiet Place movies, the cast is so sparse, right? They're in rural areas. And this movie opens with like New York City gives off this many decibels and it's super loud. There's millions of people. And so it kind of has like this idea of what do you do when there are lots of other people? And one of the most interesting scenes in the entire movie for me is, of course, the one in the Marionette Theater when they go up to the roof and then that guy is losing his mind and Jaimon Hansu is trying to keep him quiet and ends up inadvertently killing him. And what it brings out in him, his son is right there, obviously, so the stakes are incredibly high for him. But survival with strangers, I think, is a really interesting idea that this movie tackles in some places and then as a theme just kind of abandons at a certain point. But I do think it's fascinating. The sequence where, everyone's evacuating and they're all just sort of like walking as silently as possible. But of course, large groups of people are not silent. And that's a surefire way to get killed right out of the gate. I was like, just go away, Sam. Like, you already like dropped off the kids with the group. Like, that was what you were supposed to do. You don't have to keep walking with this crowd. But anyway, but all of that's really interesting, right? Like, I feel like that's what a lot of Twilight Zone episodes are about, right? Where it's like 8 people in a bunker and you're just like, what do we do with these people? And I like, it's interesting that kind of meaningful interaction in terms of, again, the drama, they are here. There are a couple of them. I find that sequence where they are walking on the street and she's starting to notice how loud they're being, I find that to be really horrifying. Like, I like the slow build of it. I like the just, how badly it's going to go because the street is packed with people who are hoping to evacuate, right? That's the other thing. It's people who have kept silent this long and managed to survive this long, but are now like trying to get to safety. I do find that like a compelling sequence, as well as the scene in the Marionette Theater and like the tension of being in those rooms where there are a lot of other people and not knowing if any one of them could make a sound at any moment for any reason, right? Like, that in itself is like being around 20 bombs that you don't know if any of them are going to go off. And the scenes that do make something of it in this movie, I really like. And the scenes, then there are so few of them. It's also like hard to navigate. Maybe it's the budget tension that you're talking about, Michael, right? Extras are expensive. Or like even additional supporting characters and tertiary characters are expensive. And designing sequences around them can be cost prohibitive. And so like at a certain point, stripping them away does make sense from a budgetary standpoint. But it does make me wonder where that leaves everything thematically. Like, I wish that, maybe nursing home nurse had hung around a little longer, or any of the other people that maybe there were more people in their party at a certain point, and then like they kind of fell away or made other choices. That would be really interesting to me too.
Right. Fill out the character web with other people that are maybe on different points of the journey to resonate her thing. Yeah. It sounds like maybe there was at one point, but maybe got changed.
Well, yeah. And of course, like we talk a lot about like the promise of the premise. You're going to set this movie in New York City. That's what the prompt is. Lots of people.
Right.
Exactly.
It's also interesting because I hadn't watched the full trailer for this movie. I had just seen the teaser, which I was happy about. The full trailer has tons of shots that are not in the movie, like scenes with people talking in different places that are not in the movie. So there's something happened in the edit here where it was really kind of stripped down to these kind of bare bones parts. And I'm wondering how much of on the cutting room floor would have filled in some of these issues.
I'd watch the hell out of a director's cut of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, give it to me.
I would too. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Well, why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take from A Quiet Place Day One? Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I will. A lesson, in case anyone goes through this, is I play a lot of stealth video games. And where it's like you can like throw a can and that distracts them and they go the other way and all that stuff. But also, like, if you accidentally make a noise, just get away from where you made the noise. Like in this movie, every time they like drop a bucket or something like that, they stop and they wait for several seconds to see if the things are coming. It's like, just tiptoe away from where that noise was immediately, as quickly as possible. And that's it. That's all I got. No, I think this, I was noticing in the first 20 minutes or so, I think this is a really good example of a movie that just finds a way of doing things differently. Especially for the third movie in a franchise. I was just noticing like, I've never seen this scene done quite like this before. I've never quite seen this kind of character. So it's like, obviously having her be terminally ill is like an interesting choice and something that obviously, in this kind of movie is a very, very interesting character choice. When she's trapped in the smoke, like right after everything happens and she can't see anything, which is obviously like interesting that she can't see and they can't see, and Eric learning about her situation from the poem and the marionette show moment, which you mentioned, Trisha, and just kind of the character design of Eric in general. There's just a lot of stuff where I just thought I haven't seen this before, and again, especially in a movie that's like a third installment in a franchise, it's like what's new here that's not just retreading old ground. So it's like, how many apocalypse movies have we seen? How many New York movies have we seen? How many alien invasion movies have we seen? And I just found myself constantly being pleasantly surprised that this movie was doing things in sort of fresh and interesting ways. It just makes me think of the word novelty, which is like usually a bad word for high art or whatever you want to call it. But it's like, because it's dangerous just to do things that are different to be different, right? It can be really lazy and unmotivated, and it can even make things messy or disoriented because everything feels too different and too unfamiliar, right? But on the other hand, it does make me lean forward, like in those moments where I just mentioned, where a setting or a character type or a plot point is different than what I'm used to seeing, especially when it's tied to something familiar. So it's like, okay, I'm getting the thing that I'm familiar that is familiar, but I'm getting it in a new and interesting way. So I just think it's like a good exercise to look at every scene or sequence in your script, or if you are a director, an editor, or even composer, whatever it is, like what can you do to just kind of give it that little zhuzh that keeps it from feeling like something we've seen 100 times. And that doesn't mean it's on a Ferris wheel for no reason, just like what's a weird thing that's happening. And if your story world is offering something interesting, or your premise is offering something interesting, then like, what can we do with it? It's kind of the stuff we talked about with this movie. Oh, you could have done this. You could have done this. But I do appreciate how much this movie did do that just felt interesting. And like, I just appreciate whenever I watch a movie that feels like every scene is like, oh yeah, I've seen this scene in a movie before, but I haven't seen this scene in a movie before. Like him reading the poem, I think is a great example of that.
That scene is wonderful.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I feel like this movie, you could tell, was really trying to do something new and be like affecting, be generous, like do something unique for the audience. And that's rare in a sequel, as we've talked about and may continue to talk about. Who knows? Let's see what happens. I think maybe I'll just jump in here because you made the joke about sound, and that's, as a stealth video game player, throw a thing. Just always have things to throw. Like I played The Last of Us. You have rocks, you throw it, they go over there. Like people could be smart about this. Yeah. But that tied to the weird thought I was having in this movie was like, it felt like their grip on the rules of what was allowed and what wasn't was a little bit slipping. And I'm not going to pretend that the first one or the second one were perfect with that. There were certainly moments in those movies where I'm like, I feel like your hard breathing is louder than that step on the sand over there. But like for the most part, I feel like so much of the tension, especially in that first movie, was these like hard rules around like, do not make a sound. We care about like the level of footstep on grass versus sand, creaking boards. You can't walk on those creepy, like the rules of the world were very tight. And that's where so much of the stress and drama came from. And I feel like in this movie, the looser grip on those was distracting for me and kind of undercut some of the drama, because if you aren't following your own rules, then if you break that, enough times, it's kind of a boy who cried wolf. It's sort of like, okay, well, they're going to be in danger when the writer says they're going to be in danger, and they're going to not when they're not. And I was kind of arriving at that toward the end. And so it was just a good reminder of like the importance of rule consistency, especially if your whole story world is built around the rule. Like, see what happens when you stick really tightly to that. I think, again, this movie is tricky because the genre mismatch of it a little bit, I think, means that like the rules weren't as important to the character story that was happening. But when I go to see A Quiet Place, that's one of my expectations. Is like, it's going to matter where they are, how loud they're whispering, how loud they're talking. Of course, hundreds of people stepping together is going to be loud.
Right. Why weren't the aliens already there?
Already there, yeah. So like they're cool things they do with it, but it felt like they kind of had to bend some of the rules in order to pull that off, which I think is, again, a prequel thing that I think we can continue to talk about across the season. So stick to your rules. That's my lesson.
This is kind of related to my lesson, But before I get to that, I want to say Lupita Nyong'o is also a lesson that I take away from this.
Yes. She's not a person as much as she is a lesson.
She's a lesson. She's a way of life. She's an icon. She's amazing. She's flawless. I want to count the number of lines she has in this movie. It cannot be many. Yeah. And the fact that she does so much with it is just wonderful. The scene where she is cleaning off her face, right? She's like covered in the white dust, and is just like very quietly cleaning off her face is just gorgeous. Like everything about her expression and the way that she moves and the way that she's perfect. The look that she gives to the I Love New York bag is is everything. Again, going back to like, what is her relationship with New York? I want more of it in the text. It's there sometimes, and then other times it's just kind of not. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. Except you should hire her.
Always, yes.
You should hope she hires you.
That's
my dearest wish. My real lesson is about setups and payoffs, which, to your point about the rules, Michael, when Eric comes out of the apartment, right, where they spend the night when it's rainy, and he's still following her. She tries to sneak away. He's still following her. His shoes are so loud. He's wearing his like dumb lawyer dress shoes. I was like, okay, he needs new shoes or he needs to walk in his socks from now on. Somehow that's not a thing that arises in that scene. Although later she gives him a pair of sneakers. Like she pulls a pair in the church. She like pulls a pair of like soft soled sneakers out of a bin of sneakers, ? And gives them to him. I assume that's what they're for. So it's weird. It's like a payoff without a setup. She never says his shoes are loud. I hear that his shoes are loud. No one comments on it in the text. And then there's a weird payoff for it later. I was highlighting earlier the voiceover about like, I love the city. It really sings blah, blah, blah. You're talking about the visual storytelling and flashbacks made me think about maybe you didn't even need to do her dad being a musician in a flashback. Maybe you could do it with a setup. Maybe you could do it with like, maybe they're in the hospice care and someone puts on an old record that is her dad playing, but it's too painful for her to hear it. So she like runs over there and like makes them turn it off because it's again, giving her that like pre-trauma feeling.
Sorry, this is triggering Night Country memories. It's the
Not
bad
Beatles
version
fan.
of that, like how to not do that scene.
How to not do that.
Yeah.
Don't do it like Jodie Foster.
do the opposite of that.
Frantically like tearing apart a wall.
Yeah.
Anyway, we talked about Night Country, everybody. For those that might
We're going to
not
mention
know.
it every episode this season for some reason.
You can listen
for
to
so long, even though it was a short season. It was the longest short season to ever watched.
It lives over on the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon if you want more of this. But anyway, what I'm saying is if it's going to be a payoff, do it with a setup. And the main thing that I was thinking about with the setups and payoffs was the final shot of the movie where she rips the headphones out of her iPod. And I don't know, according to movie rules, if that's loud or not. Doesn't sound that loud to me. It's pretty loud in the mix, but like I've seen a lot of other sounds that are decently loud to my ear that the creatures can't seem to hear. But if you establish that that was loud, all you need to do is establish that that is a loud sound earlier. You could even do it before the aliens arrive, right? Like,
Are you talking about the very ending?
Yeah.
She has it in a boombox.
Yeah, it's hooked up to an iPod.
Well,
player.
so it's speakers also. Yeah. But again, establish the gesture that she's doing. She like rips the thing out. And then I assume the music is going to come through the speakers, which again, it doesn't come up in the mix. Mm-hmm. But it's like, do the thing that you're going to do earlier so I understand better about what it is. And I just feel like there are a few things like that in this movie where it's like it could have been set up a little bit more clearly. And somehow then like things I don't know, like the sweater, she's wearing it the whole time. And then we see later that it was her father's. But you could have had a little extra moment where she like maybe smells it or like, I don't know.
And I missed that detail.
There's a scene where she hugs it close to herself, I guess, is like a tiny moment. But again, set it up a little bit more clearly so that then when she gives it to him, I know what it means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I do feel like my experience in this movie was a lot of like, oh, that's why that was important earlier in the movie. And like retroactively appreciating things, but not having the ammo or not being prepared enough to appreciate them in the moment when they need to be effective.
Right.
So like the character of Eric felt like all payoff and no setup.
Right. Yeah.
It's like the character itself.
Funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. Alex, what's your lesson?
My lesson is animals are cheat codes. And they're very effective in a horror movie. I will say it, like my cousin was sitting next to me watching this movie in a theater. She has a cat that she loves, and she was freaking out this entire movie. And I think like the cat was magic. It didn't make any sense. It survived everything and wandered back and yada yada. So it definitely felt like a mythical cat, not a real cat. But I do think they did a really good job early in the movie of establishing this really emotional importance of the cat. I mean, the way Sam holds the cat and the ways it is like a support animal does make it more than just an annoying cat in Alien, which is just like, come on, cat, like, what are you doing? Like that cat to me is like, don't risk your life for this cat. I think the movie does the work in this one where it's like, I get why this cat is meaningful as like an emotional thing for Sam. One of the few things she has that she still loves and feels emotion around. And so I think the cat was effective, maybe annoying, maybe a cheat code, but it also worked. And I think just animals, like I care about more than like in this movie or in any movie, if there's like a kid or an animal, like the animal can't die. Like the animal can't die for sure.
How dare you?
You know, kids dying is bad too, but like animals dying, people will riot. So there's something about animals and the total innocence of animals and the purity of animals that I think is very effective in a horror movie and works on people, maybe in this cheap cheat code way, but it does work.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you think animals can't die in movies, don't watch any other horror movie.
Yeah, it is true. They can't die in, as you were saying, Trisha, this kind of 90s PG-13 thing that this is hearkening back to in an interesting way. Like this is not an Ari Aster horror movie. This is something, that we don't have anymore, which is that kind of mid-range. We're not going to shock you actually with the grotesque, shocking death of the animal or the child or whatever.
When my partner and I watched 31 horror movies in October of 2020 because we didn't have much else to do, we had a little checklist as we watched each movie of like, what did this thing happen? Did this thing happen? Did someone throw up? Did someone like get possessed? And one was just like, is the first thing to die like the family's pet or something? Just like they come out and it's like on the then it wasn't no movies.
Yeah, well, I think the cat did feel different because of that emotional connection early on. It wasn't just the dog in the house. It was her support cat. And I think like, think about the 90s thing, Independence Day, we're going to watch 1 million people get burned alive by this fireball, but that dog is going to jump out of the way into the closet and it will live.
Right. Well, and that's both like Independence Day and this movie are movies where we go from just like nothing to chaos, right? The sort of the horror movie thing I'm talking about, I was just mentioning it because it was a funny like anecdote. It is like the horror is slowly building over the first 40 minutes of the movie, right? So then it's like, oh, this weird thing happened and this noise happened outside, and like suddenly like now the dog's dead and now like the neighbor's acting weird, whatever it is, like that kind of stuff. Those are the movies where the pets are, I think, a lot more expendable.
Animals are not safe in those movies.
Yeah.
Or Wes Anderson movies. That's how you know how intense it's going to be. Yeah, it's just funny because like I grew up with cats. I love cats. And so as soon as a cat showed up, I was like, no, movie, I'm not going to go on this ride with you because I know what you're going to do. You're going to kill the cat. And then instead what happened was that it wasn't a cat. And I'm like, I've grown up with cats. That is not cat behavior. Whatever she's holding is not a cat. Like, I don't know what it is, but it scares me as much as the aliens. That is not how cats react. So weirdly, I did not care about the cat at all. And when he was climbing up there to save it, I was like, no. The stakes are completely at odds here. Let whatever this being in the cat form is die. It doesn't make any sense.
I saw this with my friend Anna, who owns 2 cats, and she was also like, no, this is not a cat.
It almost worked for me because I've never had a cat. So I'm
Same.
like, it's magical like cats are, apparently.
Yeah.
You know?
No.
It is a service cat. I assume it's highly trained.
I've never seen a
Are
cat
any cats highly
exhibit
trained? Is that possible?
fraction of that kind of behavior. You ever tried to take a cat on a walk? Like, I don't care how well it's like.
There is so much leash walking of the cat in this movie.
It goes, it finds dude, it brings dude back to him, like her. It like sits in the little bag underwater in the subway and doesn't.
It's underwater
freak out.
so many times.
Like, yeah, that's not a cat. Whatever.
To the point where, like, when it ran away and climbed a beam in the alien, whatever, I was like, don't even go get it. It'll just come home.
No,
like, it's
exactly.
It's invincible.
It's
It's gonna
on
be
danger.
fine.
It probably knows something, and it's like, why are you here, dude? Like, I'm doing recon. Like, leave me alone.
Was it eating one of the egg things?
It was licking it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seemed to be.
Yeah. Because apparently that's the thing that can distract this cat, but not any of the other insanity things. Like, cars are flipping. The apocalypse is happening. It makes us. Anyway.
It did run off
I
that
like
one
this
time.
movie.
Yeah.
This
I like
movie
this
gets
movie,
one thing
yeah.
from me, and it can have the cat.
Yeah, I like this movie, and as a non-cat person, I liked the cat even as
Same.
not a cat, but as like as a Lord of the Rings fantasy being. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally Sam and Frodo. I mean, it's like,
They did call it that.
it's literally Sam and Frodo.
and the pizza is the you guys get
If
it.
the cat had carried her, then. What else have you guys been watching?
I'm really excited to go back to this. Like, but this is what didn't feel real when we talk about Twister. You guys are like, this movie's a masterpiece. Everything's perfect. I'm like, wait, but hang on.
I just have to check now, actually, because I got burned by Goldeneye. You have seen Twister, right, Brian?
I said I saw it in the theater
Okay.
originally. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just got to check.
It'll be just as good, even better upon rewatch. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah. So what else have people been watching? Alex, what have you been watching recently?
On the last episode, I mentioned I watched American Fiction on an airplane recently. I watched another movie on an airplane, which is finally The Worst Person in the World. It was recommended highly to me by Brian and
Alex.
Trisha.
Hell
You
yeah.
were correct. I loved it. So fun to watch a movie. You know, it's a director from Denmark. Is that correct? Or Norway?
Norway.
It takes place in
Nordic.
Norway, so I assume
Norway. Yeah.
Norway, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oslo, yeah, Norway. It's so refreshing to see a film from that country's perspective. You know, I see so few movies from that part of the world, and there's this delightful. It's both highly adult, but also highly playful and delightful. And I don't know, I just loved the experience of watching it. It was one of those movies where it's like, oh yes, a movie that's just kind of surprising me and taking me on this like wonderful ride. And I don't know where it's taking me, but I trust it. And yeah, the lead actress who played Julie is wonderful. And I think she's teaming up with the director for another movie.
Mhm.
So I'm all down for that. But yeah, Brian and Trisha were right. The Worst Person in the World is a delightful movie that you should watch.
Very nice. Awesome.
Favorite movie of the decade so far? Up there, contender.
Whoa, wow.
Yeah, I don't know
big.
what is, but it's a contender for sure.
Nice. Cool. All right. Trisha, what about you?
I'm watching a TV show. I know. Out on Apple TV Plus, it is called Sugar. It is the Colin Farrell noir detective show. And it's Colin Farrell, Amy Ryan. I really am liking it. It's just like it's set in modern day, but it's very much a classic like LA, Hollywood crime. He's a private detective. The like granddaughter of a Hollywood mogul has been kidnapped. He's trying to find her, and there's all this corruption, there's all this stuff, and he's tangling with the wrong people. He's got a really cool car. He like has a dog, and he's just trying to solve a crime. And I don't know, like on paper, there's a lot of stuff about it that makes me roll my eyes. The main character, his name is John Sugar, and he's the private detective, and he's also a movie fan, and so there's like a lot of like old black and white movie stuff kind of spliced in here, and he's like kind of always trying to go see a movie, and on paper I don't like that, but in the show I kind of do. I don't know, there's a lot of stuff about it that's weirdly hooking me, and I'm not done with it, but I am liking the experience of watching it and find myself thinking about it. And anyway, yeah, Sugar. It's out right now.
Nice. Yeah.
It's about time movies got representation in
right?
Cinema.
In detective fiction, especially.
Right.
There's just not enough of that.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I'd heard, I think, good things about it, but the trailer was weird to me. So now I'm extra curious. Apple TV, that thing where they have lots of shows that are, I saw some headline. It's like the place where the most critically acclaimed shows are not watched by anyone. Brian, what have you been watching?
I watched Your Name, which is a 2016 Japanese animated film that I just started seeing popping up on all these like IMDb top 250 and like 100, best movies of the past 20 years. I was like, I've never heard of it. What are you talking about? So I watched it the other night, and it's about a high school boy in Tokyo and a high school girl in rural Japan who, Trisha says that word better than I do, rural, and who one day start swapping bodies. And they have no idea why. Like one day they just wake up like, oh, what was up with you yesterday? Like, what do you mean? And they have no idea that like this even was happening. And then it keeps happening about every other day, but they're not sure when. It's not consistent. So they can't plan for it. So they have to make a system of how to handle it and start like leaving messages to each other, like Memento style, and like keeping diaries and everything so they know what's going on. And of course, a lot of that is played for comedic effect. It is in many ways a comedy, but like it's also just like a drama and ultimately like a really thoughtful and beautiful movie. Like the only body swapping movie I've ever seen that's not just like hijinks for 2 hours and then like someone learns a lesson. So it was like really surprising some of the turns it takes and where it all ends up. So yeah, Your Name 2016. I really loved it and recommend it.
Nice. Very
cool.
Michael.
So I watched on Netflix the show The Three Body Problem. And so I had read this book. This is one of those times where I've read a book.
But of course it would be this book.
Yeah, of course. It's a nerdy sci-fi book. So I had read the first in the series that the show is based on. And the book was really fascinating and had a lot of really interesting ideas and cool sci-fi, nerdy physics stuff in it that like I was really into, even if the story was like kind of opaque and hard for me to follow and confusing. And then I heard that they were making a TV show out of it. I was like, how are you going to do that? And then I heard that it was D.B. Weiss and David Benioff of Game of Thrones fame. And I was like, okay, I'm setting my expectations to a certain place. But also like what a weird pairing that the Game of Thrones people want to adapt this like nerdy sci-fi book. And so I went into the show with very low expectations. I had kind of like pre-hated it. Like I'd pre-programmed certain lines to say of like, oh, of course they're going to do that. Or like, oh my God, I can't believe that. Like I was really ready to dislike it. I think those expectations helped me surprisingly enjoy myself. There are a lot of things in it that are very painful. I think if you appreciate the elevated nature of the science in the book, like there was a moment where I was like, this sounds like dumb people trying to write smart people. And it's just so desperately trying to be like, no, scientists are cool. Look at them. They're in a bar. They're getting hit on. Like they swear, they smoke, they drink, they have sex. They're cool. What's that? I can quote Einstein because I'm a scientist. There's a lot of that.
Yep.
The characters can be distancing. But like in between all of that, like desperate attempts to make it accessible, there is still the telling of the kind of wild sci-fi story underneath that is, I think, hard to adapt and doesn't like intrinsically rely on any of the things you would usually do for like a sci-fi story of this kind. Jess Hong, who's one of the actors, who's actually the protagonist of the show, despite what marketing would have you believe, I think is really interesting. So it's just like on a meta level, it's fascinating to see this entity, this sci-fi book created as a TV show by the Game of Thrones dudes. I found it ultimately engaging, and I'm happy they're making a second season because I want to know what happens, and it made me want to read the rest of the books in the series. But also, it has a lot of things that are super annoying and I hate. So it's really fascinating. The 3-Body Problem on Netflix.
There you go.
It's such an interesting example of a show where I was both at once so thrilled to be getting these sci-fi ideas, and the premise is so cool, and just so dismayed over the like CW vibes of it all. Like it was like the most elevated ideas with the most like tacky execution at times. And it was such a cognitive dissonance. It was wild.
It was fascinating. Yeah. Yep.
Perfect.
Well, this has been our conversation about A Quiet Place Day 1. This was week 3 of our sequel summer. As I said, next week we will be back for Twister, which is going to be super, super fun. Brian's going to love it. He's not going to have any notes. It's just going to be singing about how amazing it is, and we're always right, just like with The Mummy.
There's a cow.
Yeah, and another cow.
Another cow.
It's important that you remember. Then we'll talk about Twisters, the sequel. That's going to be interesting. That'll be a Patreon exclusive. So fun things coming up for our sequel summer. I want to say thank you to the patrons that make this show possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editors, Jose Gomez and Vicky Lewis. I'm Michael Tucker. I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet and say hi, and we will see you in the next episode for our discussion of Twister.
Bye, everybody.
Cue the Nina Simone.
Bye.